Today, more than ever before, there's this subtle message being sent to women that if your body isn't constantly buzzing with desire or craving attention, you're somehow missing something. That silence inside you, it's painted as emptiness, as if you're lacking or failing emotionally. But what if that silence isn't emptiness at all? What if it's actually the very first whisper of your soul, the gentle signal that something bigger is trying to reach you? When a woman, whether she realizes it or not, starts to pull away from the endless cycle of seeking validation or playing the games of fleeting affection, something deep within her begins to wake up. It's not about absence. It's about a new kind of presence. It's not about lack. It's about expansion. Carl Jung talked about how any energy we repress, anything we push down, will always find a new way to surface. And when the body stops chasing quick fixes and instant pleasure, suddenly, the soul has the space it needs to speak up. Have you ever noticed how so many women, after a period of abstinence, talk about an unexpected spiritual awakening? They mention dreams that suddenly become vivid, intuitions that feel sharper, a sense of connection that wasn't there before. That isn't just a fluke. It's a calling. When the body is no longer reaching outward for touch or attention, it naturally turns inward. And in that unexplored, sometimes forgotten inner world, a woman begins to discover parts of herself that were always there, just waiting to be seen. Not just by others, but by herself. And look, this isn't just about celibacy. It's about something deeper: transmutation. It's the process of shifting energy that's been looking for fulfillment in others and redirecting it inside, learning to cultivate it for yourself. We live in a society that thrives on constant sexual validation, and that's why it's so threatened by women who choose to step out of that loop. A woman who isn't playing the game, she becomes unpredictable, a little mysterious, maybe even intimidating, because she starts to see through it all. She sees beyond the repetitive cycles, beyond the masks and the roles that so many relationships force us into. Jung would have called this meeting the shadow. It's that moment when a woman stops waiting to be chosen and starts making her own choices. She stops loving just so she'll be loved in return and starts loving herself so fiercely that anything shallow just falls away on its own. There's a kind of silence that isn't about emptiness at all. It's sacred. It's like a temple. When the body goes quiet, it's often because the soul is about to light a fire that can't be ignored. A woman living without sex or relationships isn't dead inside. In fact, she might be more alive than ever. What looks like emptiness is actually an overflowing of inner presence. What looks like loneliness is really a communion with something no romance could ever reach. It's in that space that the archetype of the wild woman stirs. She reconnects with ancient wisdom, her gut instincts, the feminine energy that doesn't need an audience or applause. Can you feel that? Not everyone will. This isn't for every woman. It's for those who are tired of trading their essence for scraps of connection. It's for the woman who realizes what she's searching for isn't in anyone else's arms, but in a radical, honest encounter with herself. And if you're still with me right now, maybe you're closer to that journey than you think. So yes, the body goes silent, but that's not weakness. It's strength, gathering itself, preparing to become something even more powerful. And when the soul finally finds its voice, there's no going back. A woman who has truly heard her soul will never again settle for the faint echo of ordinary love. There's a point in every woman's life when the noise, especially the internal noise, becomes unbearable. Not just the noise around her, but the constant hum of expectations that aren't her own, the desires she's been told she's supposed to have, the affections she's been trained to seek. And it's in that deep, almost invisible exhaustion that the journey back to herself quietly begins. Jung said that whatever we deny in ourselves comes back to us as fate. Maybe that's why, when the body chooses silence, it shouldn't be seen as a failure. It's a sign that something much greater is trying to break through. When a woman starts to step back from the impulses that once seemed to guide her, even if she can't quite explain why, she's already responding to a silent call from deep within. Not from her skin, but from her soul. That woman starts to feel a longing she can't name. It's not about missing a man or craving a touch or reliving a passionate night. It's a longing for herself, for a place she hasn't been, but somehow knows exists. In this sense, abstinence isn't a punishment. It's a portal. And when she steps through it, she begins what Jung called individuation, a radical path to becoming whole, where she finally stops projecting her needs onto others and learns to see herself clearly. The emptiness she feels isn't really emptiness at all. It's space being cleared for something more authentic to grow. Old memories start to ache in a new way, not as wounds, but as clues to a bigger story. Past relationships, tearful nights, all those repeating cycles. They suddenly start to make sense in a new light, because the woman who embraces silence isn't retreating from life. She's rewriting her own story, seeing her emotions as mirrors reflecting her unconscious mind, which has always been talking to her, but which she couldn't hear over the noise of desire. Slowly, she realizes she doesn't need applause or validation from outside anymore. Her worth isn't measured by how many people want her, but by how deeply she can sit with herself in silence. And at this point, a kind of mystical force is born, a force that comes from no longer needing to be chosen. This is where the world starts to fear her, because what do you do with someone who no longer begs for love? She becomes whole, and that wholeness is dangerous to anything that only knows how to live halfway. When she realizes her energy isn't dead, just gathered and redirected, she steps into a new kind of consciousness, one without hurry, without the need to prove anything. Because the silence of the body isn't punishment. It's a language, and that language is only understood by those brave enough to explore their own depths. Jung would have called this a reconciliation with the feminine unconscious, a reconnection to ancient symbols buried under centuries of repression. And this reunion doesn't happen with words, but with presence. That woman is just beginning to emerge. The journey, though, is anything but gentle. A strange restlessness appears, an invisible tension that eats away from the inside. When a woman starts pulling away from immediate desire, from the comfort of another's presence, she also steps back from everything that once made her feel like she belonged. And what's left, at first, is a raw discomfort. It's as if the world has stopped recognizing her, as if her absence from the game of desire has rendered her invisible. Jung would say this is the beginning of the encounter with the shadow. It's the part of herself she's hidden or repressed for years, the part that's learned to adapt, to seek validation, to perform, but now simply refuses to keep pretending. At this stage, the questions begin. Was it a mistake to step away? Am I losing my mind? Am I wasting my youth and my chances while the world keeps spinning, while everyone else seems to be moving forward? Because society is loud. It screams that a woman's time is running out, that you should always be in motion, conquering, being chased, fulfilling someone else's expectations. Suddenly, you realize you don't fit anywhere. You're not the lover, not the wife, not anyone's muse, not even the girlfriend. You're just yourself. And honestly, that can hurt more than any breakup or abandonment ever could. Abstinence starts to feel like a punishment, but really it's more like a test, a symbolic journey that only the souls willing to go deep can pass. Suddenly, temptations crop up everywhere. Old patterns come knocking. Invitations, distractions, the easy way out. It all reappears, as if the universe is testing how committed you are to this path. And the most painful part? Sometimes no one around you understands what you're going through. Friends might question your choices. Family might urge you to go out more, to stop isolating yourself. But they don't see that it isn't isolation, it's immersion. You're not hiding from life. You're diving deep into it. And not everyone is ready to watch someone plunge into their own depths while the rest of the world floats on the surface. Jung saw this as a necessary phase of individuation. The ego starts to panic because it senses it's losing control. That's when the soul quietly begins to take charge. It's during this silent despair, this lonely in-between, that many people turn back. They retreat to old comforts, accept lukewarm love, or convince themselves that something, anything, is better than nothing. But the woman who stays, who persists through tears and doubt, is being shaped by something much larger than herself. She's being called to break a cycle, and cycles aren't broken by brute force. They're broken by awareness. That tension you feel isn't a mistake. It's a sign of transformation. The cocoon always tightens before the butterfly is born. That's what's really happening. A new self is being formed in the darkness of this silence. Deep down, she knows it. Even if she can't quite put it into words, even if she fears she's too alone, too misunderstood, too intense for the world. But there's a voice inside, a presence that doesn't shout but quietly insists, keep going. It's the symbol of the archetypal feminine, what Jung called the bridge between consciousness and mystery. That's who she's really talking to now, her deeper self, her anima. The more she listens to this internal dialogue, the clearer things become. Her body isn't simply on pause, it's in ritual. A ritual the modern world has forgotten, but one her soul never lost. And then, almost imperceptibly, something shifts. New understanding starts to bloom. Restlessness morphs into deeper questions. Why did I always need to feel desired to feel alive? Why does the absence of another feel so unbearable? What part of me still relies on being seen by others just to exist? The woman who keeps her silence is not stepping away from life. She's rewriting her own story from a whole new vantage point. Her inner self starts to see her emotions as mirrors, each one reflecting something the unconscious has always been trying to say, but which the noise of desire kept hidden. Little by little, she realizes she doesn't need to be cheered or confirmed by someone else. Her worth isn't about how much her body is wanted, but about how deeply she can sustain her own soul's presence in the silence. It's at this stage that an almost mystical force emerges, the energy of a woman who no longer needs to be chosen. And this is the moment when the world gets uneasy, because it doesn't know what to do with someone who has stopped begging for love. She becomes whole, and that wholeness is a challenge to everything and everyone still living halfway. When she recognizes that her vital energy isn't asleep, just gathered and waiting, she enters a new state of consciousness. There's no more hurry, no more proving herself. The body's silence isn't punishment, it's a language, and only those willing to dwell in their own depths can really understand it. Jung would have called this a reconciliation with the feminine unconscious, a return to ancient wisdom and symbols that have been buried under centuries of repression. This healing isn't something that happens through words, but through presence. The woman who emerges from this process is just beginning her journey. But let's be honest, the path isn't easy. There's restlessness, an invisible anguish that gnaws from the inside. When a woman steps away from immediate gratification, from familiar touch, from the presence of another body in her bed, she also steps away from the things that made her feel like she belonged. What's left is often a raw discomfort, as if her absence from the world of desire has made her invisible. Jung would say this is the start of meeting the shadow, the part of herself she pushed aside for years, the part that adapted and thirsted for validation, but now won't play along anymore. She might question everything. Was it wrong to step away? Is she going crazy? Is she wasting precious time, youth, and opportunities? Society tells her a woman's time is limited, that she should always be achieving, being wanted, fitting into someone else's mold. And suddenly, she doesn't fit anywhere. She's not the lover, the wife, the muse, or the fiancé. She's just herself. That, in its own way, hurts more than abandonment. Abstinence can start to feel like punishment, but it isn't, it's a test. A journey only certain souls are ready for. Temptations will show up. Old habits will beckon. Easy invitations will return. Everything seems designed to test her resolve. And the hardest part is, almost no one around her gets what's happening. Friends question her. Family nudges her to go out and not lock herself away. But this isn't seclusion, it's immersion. Most people aren't prepared to watch someone dive deep when everyone else is content to skim the surface. Jung saw this as a necessary phase of individuation, the ego panicking because it's losing control while the soul subtly, quietly starts taking the wheel. It's in this silent, lonely place that many give up. They go back to old patterns, accept mediocre love, talk themselves into believing even a half-hearted connection is better than nothing. But the woman who holds on, even through tears and confusion, is being shaped by a force greater than herself. She's being called to end the cycle. And cycles can't be broken by brute will, they break through awareness. The tension she feels is a sign of transition, not a mistake. The cocoon grows tightest right before the butterfly emerges. That's what's happening. A new self is gestating in the darkness of silence. Deep down, she knows it. Even if she can't explain it, even if she fears she's too alone, too misunderstood, too complicated. There's a voice that doesn't shout but continues, a presence that doesn't show itself but is always there. And that presence is the symbol of the feminine archetype, the anima that Jung described as a bridge between the conscious mind and the great mystery. As this internal dialogue deepens, her understanding grows. Her body isn't on pause. It's engaged in ritual, an ancient ritual the modern world has forgotten but her soul remembers. And then, almost invisibly, something changes. Restlessness becomes deeper inquiry. Why did I always need to be desired to feel alive? Why does being alone feel so unbearable? What part of me still needs someone else's gaze to feel real? The woman who goes through all this stops using relationships as anesthesia. She doesn't swap affection for company just to avoid loneliness. Even if that means facing long, silent nights, she knows her body isn't just abstinent. It's protecting itself, making sacred space for something that comes from her soul, not from a sense of lack. The true transformation comes when she realizes she no longer needs to be sought out. She becomes the center, the flame, the light that reveals what's real. And when her light is fully on, those who can't handle the brightness simply move away. Anyone who approaches now has to meet her fully, because this woman who has crossed through silence will never again accept living dimmed. She's no longer available for ordinary relationships, because she herself is no longer ordinary. And when the body finally goes quiet, it's because the soul is making the choices. And once the soul wakes up, it never again chooses what once wounded it. That's when she rises, not as someone returning to the world unchanged, but as someone who has become the world. Every step she takes is now conscious. Every decision is measured, not by fear of being alone, but by the value she places on her own company. The body that used to be silent now pulses with a new energy, subtler, deeper, truer. There's no more desperation to fill empty spaces. No more shrinking to fit into places that are too small for who she's become. Carl Jung once said, "What you deny submits you. What you accept transforms you." And this woman, she's finally accepted her absences. She's made peace with what was missing. She's turned her silence into a sacred altar. But here's the part almost nobody notices. She's not waiting for a savior. The woman who's walked through her own darkness no longer waits to be rescued. She's already rescued herself, and that changes everything. She can't go back to the old way of living. What used to be need is now choice. What used to be compulsion is now discernment. She can love absolutely, but her love now comes from a place of overflow, not emptiness. And when love arrives, it won't be there to complete her. It'll simply walk alongside her, because she is already whole. And this new state, it awakens something powerful, a sense of purpose, a clear mission. She realizes her journey wasn't just about her. The symbolic. Her silent body stands for every woman who was ever taught to depend, to distract herself, to settle. Now she feels compelled to be a beacon, not to lead others, but to light the spark within them. Because only someone who has found herself in the dark can teach others not to be afraid of it. Jung would say this is when the self manifests, when the soul no longer seeks acceptance but expression. Everything she lost along the way, the old loves, the fragile versions of herself, the relationships where she had to shrink, none of it stings like it once did. Every loss now feels like a kind of liberation. Every absence is an answered prayer. Because the woman who has made it through abstinence of the flesh has discovered nourishment for the soul. And that nourishment fills her from within. Nothing from the outside will ever be enough unless it resonates with what already lives inside her. So, she prepares herself, not to slip back into old roles, but to take up a new place in the world. A place where her presence is enough, where her voice matters, where her silence is honored. And when her body desires again, it will be out of sacred choice, not emotional dependency or hunger. When love arrives, it won't find a desperate woman. It will find a woman who is full, complete, and ready. And until that happens, she remains steady, not in abstinence, but in wakefulness. Because now she knows, when the body quiets down, it's the soul that finally gets to speak. There are silences that might seem cold from the outside, but if you look closer, they're full of embers. There are absences that sound like loss, but inside, they're fertile ground. And there are women who, when they withdraw from the world, don't extinguish, they ignite, but on another level. When the body falls silent, it doesn't die. It becomes an altar, a sacred space for the soul's voice to finally be heard. Everything that once seemed like a lack now reveals itself as divine presence, gestating a new identity, clearer, rarer, whole. Nothing lived is ever lost. Everything is transmuted. Desire, which once burned with urgency, now becomes a choice. Pain that once felt like an open wound becomes a scar of wisdom. The woman who walks through abstinence consciously isn't stepping away from love. She's learning to love from a place where there's no more hunger, only abundance. And in that quiet abundance, she becomes untouchable. Not because nobody can reach her, but because nobody can manipulate her anymore. Can you sense the reflection of this journey in yourself? That nameless longing, the ache of no longer fitting into places where you used to belong, the urge to retreat even when you're not sure why. That isn't weakness. It's the first call. Maybe you didn't find this video by accident. Maybe it's acting as a mirror for something that's been inside you all along but didn't have a name, until now. And now that it does, something in you has shifted. If this journey touched a forgotten part of who you are, let yourself keep going. Don't snuff out the spark that just got lit. Share this message with someone who also feels her body has grown quiet but doesn't yet understand why. Leave a comment below telling us how this resonated with you. And if you want to keep walking this path with us, with this same depth and honesty, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Every word is a seed. Every silence is rich soil. And every video is a ritual. Because, in the end, that's what remains. A woman who's learned to hear the whispers of her soul, even when the world is too loud. And those whispers say, "You are not alone. You are awakening."